Jack, we're going to talk about benchmarking today. Would you like to hear a very quick story of one of the first benchmarking meetings that I did?
Yes, please. They are often some of the best stories out there.
I'm going to preface this with I'm going to blame it on you because I think you were my manager at the time, so I'm going to say it's your fault because you sent me to do this. But I'd gone to a benchmarking meeting. I think it was in Kent, and that's a group of probably 6 or 8 farmers. And one of them said, "Oh, I need to move this from hectares to acres." So me, being the slight smart ass that I was at that point, went, "Wow, you just need to multiply that by 2.4711." And the farmer turned to me, completely stony-faced, and went, "Yes, I know that, boy." Put me right in my place.
Well, at the grand old age of nearly 42, I can happily still say that I get referred to as young man. So that's ever keeping me young.
It's a win. Hello, and a big welcome to Agonomics with me, David Udall.
And me, Jack Watts.
If you like agriculture and economics,
or want to brush up on what's happening with regards to price in the industry
to help maximise any profit,
then Agonomics is the show for you.
This week, we go beyond market analysis. It's all about Farmbench.
Yes, an online benchmarking tool that allows you to compare your farm to similar businesses.
It's a clever way to unearth your strengths and help identify where you can improve efficiency and increase profits.
Don't just take our word for it, as we'll be joined by our colleague, Julie Clark, who's the lead Farmbench manager at AHDB.
So please follow or subscribe to this podcast to make sure you don't miss an episode.
New shows drop every Wednesday at midday, and please get in touch.
You can comment on any of AHDB's social channels
or email us agonomics@ahdb.org.uk. There's still plenty of love for this podcast on social media, and I know some are kindly resharing. Keep it up. We'd love word to spread as far and wide as possible. We even got a mention in this month's Pig World magazine, including one of those fancy QR codes taking you directly to our back catalogue of hits like Land Market Outlook, Top Performers, and who could forget our full-length debut, Pork Stability and the Grain Market Roller Coaster.
Still my favourite work we've ever done, Jack. That should get us a Grammy. That should.
Sony Podcast Awards.
Is there any podcast awards? I didn't know.
So, yeah.
That must be. All right, well, that's our aim, isn't it? Anyway, as ever, we've both got a mystery word, phrase, or a thing that has no right to be in a podcast about agriculture or economics that we've got to try and slip in somewhere. So try and spot them if you can.
So in this episode, we are going to start looking at some of the work that the economics and analysis team does that isn't market analysis, and there's a lot of it. And I think we're going to spend a few episodes actually looking at some of that work. And this week, we're going to start looking at Farmbench and what that does for levy payers in terms of supporting and understanding and improving of production economics. One person that can explain that and give us an in-depth view of what Farmbench is and how levy payers can get the most out of it is Julie Clark. Julie is our lead Farmbench manager at AHDB. Julie, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Just give us a bit of an introduction to Farmbench, what it is, the sectors we work in, and the team that you lead.
Farmbench, as mentioned, is our online benchmarking tool at AHDB. It gives farmers the opportunity to identify each of their enterprises on farm and benchmark them to full cost of production and net margin level. So looking at the production of that crop or that animal and considering the costs, both variable and overheads, to give them that true cost of production and net margin figure. Within that, we work within both cereals and oilseeds and beef and lamb across the two sectors. So cereals and oilseeds across the UK and beef and lamb within England only. And across those two sectors, we work slightly different. So on the cereals and oilseeds side, we do more work on the group side. On the beef and lamb, it's more of a one-to-one relationship visit with the farmer, looking at that data, gathering that data and looking at the results from that data. I'm responsible for leading a team of 4. So there's 5 of us that cover the full UK working on Farmbench.
And I suppose as well, Julie, the output of that, we can talk about, I suppose, the detail in a minute, but also like how we as AHDB then use that data. Is that data then creates national data sets that we're then able to analyse to create more analysis and more information that goes out to broader levy payers. So it's obviously something that's on a micro level, looking at individual business performance, but we're able to get a bit of a macro picture from combining all those data sets into one, and that then goes into our analysis machine, which isn't really a machine, it's actually a load of people. I'm probably really simplifying their job there. I'm going to have to apologise to my department after that. And then they're able to then turn that into valuable analysis that goes out. So there is a kind of a full loop, I suppose, a feedback loop that goes all the way around with it, which is really important for us.
As you've said, it's important for us to make use of the inputs that's going into Farmbench and widen that output to other levy payers, which also helps increase the numbers within Farmbench as well. So the more data that we have in the system, the more comparisons we have to share across the industry, which is really important.
Back to basics. Benchmarking is a really, really important exercise and a strategic tool that farmers can use. Julie, what benefits do you see?
Probably one of the overall benefits is that discipline to look at their figures on an annual basis. Mm-hmm. Every farmer across the UK looks at their data and that cost of production data slightly different way, slightly different levels, whether it's really granular level or quite top level. But the opportunity they have with Farmbench is to go through that on an annual cycle and look at it in a pretty granular level. And whether that's just as an individual looking at their data or within a group format, they're getting a true benefit out of seeing the figures in black and white and knowing exactly where they are to then be able to know what's working for them on farm, and also to think about marketing strategies with that as well. So knowing their cost of production gives them that really clear number to then know what's going to be a good price at the end of the day, whether that's for a ton of grain or a finished lamb.
Yeah, that's really, really important to have that, as you say, that discipline to immerse yourself into the detail of the business, the various different cost levels, whether that's full cost of production, whether that's at the cash cost. And particularly, I always find really helping farmers understand what their own time is worth.
Within Farmbench, we value that as unpaid or family labour. We have those conversations that the farmer may think it doesn't cost anything to the business. But then I always kind of use the analogy that, if you were to, fall ill and weren't able to go out and do that work, what would it cost for someone else to do that work? And that gets their mind thinking in terms of, if I'm not there, who would be filling that void, that gap?
I suppose it's an interesting way to look at it there, the way, we're thinking about time and the way we're talking about it in terms of the value of it. But there's also an element of linking back to that top performance work that we were talking about previously, where, those top performers in sort of top quartile are dedicating more time to this sort of micro level of their business to understand what drives it. But that isn't an easy thing to do for every farm, given the structure of those farms and everything else that we're asking them to do. So this is also a bit of a kind of, it links both the business side in terms of the actual kind of micro level data. There's kind of a bigger picture analysis side in terms of the amalgamated data it creates. But there's also kind of like a personal psychological level to this as well, because you've got to want to do it. But I suppose as a question, Julie, for those farmers that are probably listening to this going, sounds fantastic, but I don't have an extra 4 hours in the day, is there anything that you'd say is kind of a, like a few key steps that people could take to start that journey to benchmarking without diving in and having to, pull out all of the farm accounts? Is there a few sort of smaller, simple steps that people could take?
Yeah, absolutely, David. It's important, and the way that we've designed Farmbench is important that we are able to accommodate for every farm at different levels within that data analysis journey and the way that they've got their data recorded. My kind of top tips for farmers would be to have a look at the programme and have a little bit of an overview in terms of the information that's required. Have a think about potentially the total costs for their labour, their machinery, their property, not quite delving into the detail of each category. have a think about the yields and the price that they're selling the crop for, or have a look at the numbers of finished animals or store animals, whatever it is that they're selling. And have a look at those headline figures initially. So thinking about the total production and the total income of those crops or animals, whatever it may be, and then moving into the kind of total cost section. So not getting too hung up on every ounce of detail initially. Also, the important bit is getting in contact with the team so we can support with the data collection element. And we've got a lot of tools, different resources for Farmbench that gives people the opportunity to get started, whatever level they're at. And we've had a few farmers that have rearranged how they're recording their data so that it aligns with how the data goes into Farmbench. So it makes it really straightforward for them to then take that data and pop it straight into the tool. So we don't want to discourage anyone from getting involved. Not everyone loves technology, loves using the computer, the laptop, whatever it may be. And that's where myself and the team are there to support with that, help the farmers get involved, and just get them off to a start within the journey of Farmbench.
I think for me, having that resource in there for levy payers to kind of fall back on to offer that support, not just to do the benchmarking, but as you said, Julie, to kind of, it can be quite daunting. Farming is a very practical industry, and it can be quite difficult to say, actually, where do I start understanding the economics of this business? But I like your previous analogy if you were going ill, and I think that's kind of, if a business partner was going to go on maternity leave, for instance, how would they handle all of that over to someone to look after going forward, and the visibility of the business. I think it's also important is that what we're seeing in agriculture is to sort of to manage the risk and to give that cash flow resilience. Agriculture is becoming just one enterprise in a rural business. And so to have a good handle on what that bit of the business is doing, how is it performing, how is it doing, and how much of my management time should I be spending on it is a really important part.
Absolutely. I think as well it comes down to people's attitude to risk as well. That's a conversation that we have quite a lot within the group meetings that we do for Farmbench, and people's attitude to risk, depends on, what they're going to potentially invest in, what they're going to sell their product at, and are they going to hold on to it in the hope that the market will go back up, or are they happy to go with, this particular price at the time? And it all comes down to that personality type as well, and how they kind of find themselves within that. So it's quite interesting working with different characters, different farmers across the country that have obviously different, everyone has different personalities, and that really shines through within the group work that we do.
I suppose this is also even more prevalent given the fact we've lost the or losing direct payments on an English basis, and new support schemes being adopted. That actually this is kind of around that sort of health check, I suppose, for the business as well. And it's also about having a view as to where you want your business to be over a period of time. And this can be a management tool that can help with that process. I've always kind of looked at the act of benchmarking, whichever sort of system you use. It's useful on a single year basis, but it's over multi-years where it really comes into value, where you see changes through seasons, etc., and you see, patterns that start to emerge. And obviously, when you kind of look at the impact of overheads, fixed costs compared to variable costs in businesses, it's extremely different. So I think from that perspective, I've always thought benchmarking is a longer term thing. It does require a commitment, but I think that's kind of what we're trying to do with Farmbench, is provide a way in and a starting point for that commitment that can make it as easy as possible for everyone.
We've added into Farmbench over the last few years year-on-year reports so that farmers can look at those enterprises over a year-on-year basis. There can be quite large fluctuations in terms of, we've seen really high grain prices over the last few years. We've also seen very high fertiliser and fuel, machinery prices as well. So to be able to get a handle on those fluctuations, see how that's affecting the business, that's really the ultimate aim, is that year on year look at your own business. It's all very well getting involved with a group and seeing how others in the group and sharing, and that peer-to-peer learning element is really important. But it's also very important that you look at your business year on year, and that's really the ultimate aim of what we're trying to give back to the farmers with Farmbench.
Farming at the end of the day is a long-term business. No one ever is farming for 1 year and 1 year only. We're often talking multi-generation type approaches here. So I think it's logical to challenge us actually how you're managing the business for the long term as well, because and particularly from a profit point of view, I touched on cash flow resilience before, but because we're operating commodity cycles and weather cycles, it is difficult to look at agricultural profit in 1 year in isolation. You have to look at the long view. In my view, you're working to sort of almost a 5-year cycle, whether it's a crop rotation or building genetics in a suckler herd or something like that. You have to sort of take that long view. So whereas you're managing cash flow risk, which is very short term, and that's where diversification really helps, you do need that long-term focus on profitability. Benchmarking can help, I think, really identify where are my sources of profit, where's that profit being sunk away from my business because I'm uncompetitive in particular areas. Is it in disease control? Is it in crop establishment? Is it in finance and all those other bits and pieces as well? And I think businesses should be encouraged to be fascinated by this stuff and not be afraid of it. Face into it. There's a lot of support out there to really get involved.
I think it helps to explain market volatility as well, in a way that if you think of the sectors we're talking about here of cereals and beef and lamb, we've spoken about the lamb market outlook in recent weeks, Jack, where we had new season lamb prices well over £9 a kilo, and that sort of big spike and all of the issues that were driven there. And then obviously over the last couple of years, we saw cereal prices on the futures market at £350 a tonne, and now back down to below £200 a tonne. And again, using that kind of longer term view of it, you can almost kind of diagnose the impact of market volatility upon your business. And then when that volatility occurs again, you're almost setting yourself a bit of a line in the sand in terms of how that's affected your business before. And obviously there's other factors that come into it, but I think it's a way of probably creating some kind of structure for farm businesses to be able to you'll probably understand what the impact of all of those different changes is upon their business. And this is almost just kind of like, in a way, like you've got that Ikea furniture that's sat out there and you're trying to figure out how to build it and how to put it all together. Farmbench and benchmarking can be the instruction manual for you to go through of going, okay, well, I can put the data in. It can be a simple process. It can give me an answer. It can kind of take all of that noise of stuff and simplify it and normalize it. So it's actually something that's quite easy for people to understand what the actual end impact on their business is. And ultimately what we're trying to do is then help those levy payers in those sectors to be able to make better business decisions and therefore be more, as you said, profitable, sustainable on a financial sense because of those longer term multi-generational aims of these businesses. Right, we are going to take a break now to get the latest market information. And when we come back on Agronomics, we'll be talking a bit more about the data and what it actually tells us.
If you're in the market for another podcast to subscribe to, then look no further than our Manager's Special, AHDB's Food and Farming podcast. Recent episodes include a consumer insight offering on red meat labels and supermarket aisles, as well as a dairy special about our work with retailers to promote milk. If you're after herbs, or rather herbal lays, our shelves are stacked with sage advice on how to introduce lucerne and clover into your fields. In fact, we cater for all tastes, so you'll find sections dedicated to all sectors: pork, cereals and oilseeds, dairy and beef and lamb. And don't forget our middle aisle, where you can often pick up a bargain episode you didn't know you needed to listen to. Search Food and Farming wherever you get your podcasts. AHDB thanks you for your custom.
Hi, I'm Olivia Bonser, Senior Analyst at AHDB, with a look at grain and oilseed markets for the week commencing the 6th of January. Despite some support in wheat markets over the Christmas period, prices have been under pressure in the new year from a strengthening US dollar, technical selling and sluggish global demand. However, Russian wheat crop conditions remain in focus, with warmer than usual temperatures and excess moisture in key growing regions. Persistent hot and dry weather in Argentina is also raising concern over the country's maize crop, which is now in its critical development stage. For rapeseed, new crop prices are supported, with doubts over prospects for global rapeseed production in 2025, though forecasts of heavy soybean supplies from South America limit any major price increases. Over the next few weeks, weather in major exporting countries such as South America and Russia will be key in driving prices. The USDA will also release updated global supply and demand estimates at the end of this week. To stay up to date with the latest data and analysis across arable, red meat and dairy markets, head to hdb.org.uk and click on Markets and Prices.
Welcome back to Agonomics. My name is Jack Watts. With me, as always, is David Udall, and our special guest this week is Julie Clark, who is our lead Farmbench manager. We're talking about benchmarking this week as we look at a range of work that we do in economics analysis at AHDB that isn't all market analysis. So we gave a bit of an intro into Farmbench, the importance of benchmarking. Julie, you talk quite a lot about benchmarking groups. I'd imagine to a farmer that's not necessarily been involved in benchmarking before, talking to them about, right, you're going to get into a group and you're going to compare all of the ins and outs of your finances of your business. I'd imagine that 9 out of 10 farmers would probably run for the hills straight away. So could you give us a little bit of an insight into how a benchmarking group works and what there is not to be afraid of?
Yeah, so the benchmarking groups at HDB, these are mainly on the cereals and oilseeds side. We do a little bit of group work on the livestock side, but mainly within the cereals and oilseeds sector. These groups majority of them have formed through the Monitor Farm programme and have been formed when a new Monitor Farm has launched, but then have continued on as a business group once that season of Monitor Farm or Strategic Farm has finished. So we've got over 40 groups that run across the UK. Some of those groups have been running up to 10, 11, 12 years now. They get together usually 2 to 3 times per year. We brand them as arable business groups. And within that format, they get together usually between November and February to look at their Farmbench figures from that past harvest. So it'll be up to the group members to put their data in with the support, of course, of my team. And then we'll get together within the group format to look at those figures. The subsequent meetings to that would tend to be on-farm meetings in the spring and summer, where effectively we'd use that time to bring the figures to life, have a look at the crops, have a look at particular maybe investments on the farm, diversification on the farm, and it gives the group members a real handle on each of the businesses that they're looking at when they come together in the winter time to look at the figures. It's quite important for the members to understand how those farm businesses operate, what other things are potentially going on in the business out with the cereals and oilseeds crops, and also gives them a really good handle in terms of, looking at the crops, soil type, etc.
What kind of makes it for me is that bringing together of, okay, we've done the classroom bit of immersing us into the technology and the numbers, but then here's what it looks like on a farm within the group. And I think something like depreciation's always kind of feels like something that's quite difficult to kind of visualize. But if we can see all of that kit sat on farm and actually think, and then sort of almost revisit the depreciation figures in a machinery register that was actually, this is what it's costing. I think that can be really, really quite sobering, can't it?
The benefits of getting everyone together looking at the figures is brilliant, but that opportunity for the peer-to-peer learning element is the real key bit. The figures are just the foundation. It's the chat round the table, the chat round the farm shed, the chat round the combine that's just been bought this year or whatever it may be. That is the real valuable bit. That's where the farmers are the experts. They learn from each other. It's up to myself and the team to facilitate those discussions, but they truly learn from each other through that peer-to-peer element.
I remember several years ago sitting in on a benchmarking group, and it was sort of just as a year we were coming into moving. Minimum tillage had been around for a bit, and everyone was looking at, okay, how do we look at sort of direct tillage, direct drilling, sorry. And it was like, well, I've got a disc drill, but sometimes I need a tine drill. I might buy a tine drill. But then suddenly you kind of saw people, well, actually, I want to do the same. So how do we work collaboratively then to have access to all the technology we need, rather than everyone having various different types of drill, have almost a little bit more of a collaboration to realize that there's actually some opportunity to share some resources and indeed some learning in a similar geography on similar soil types.
I've got an example with some farms up in Scotland that have that are now sharing a combine. So they're thinking about that area as one area and utilising the combine to the best of its ability. They're not large scale farms, so having a brand new combine sitting in their depreciation just doesn't necessarily weigh up against the amount of hectares that they're farming. So that opportunity there to be able to share equipment, share depreciation, minimise their costs, but still maximise their output is really vital.
From an overall perspective, Julie, we do like an evaluation each year, don't we, in terms of the impact of being part of a group and kind of how people think they've saved money, etc. And some of the figures behind those evaluations are pretty impressive, aren't they?
If we do think back to our Harvest 23 evaluation, we ask farmers if they can put a monetary value on the effect that the changes that they've made using Farmbench and being involved within a group has had on their business. And it's quite staggering actually to see some of the figures. Looking at the figures now, the 24% of them have made more than a 10k saving, which is massive. And you're breaking that down. There's some that's within that 20 to 30k plus bracket, which is such an amazing opportunity for them to be able to save that money and utilise it in other parts of the business.
I suppose it's also those things whereby there's using that example that you were just talking about a moment ago about people coming together to use machinery. There's probably areas where there's quite big chunks of saving that people can make quite quickly. And I suppose this is where we kind of get into that, the way that the groups work. And over time, they kind of go from those kind of big, easy wins to kind of talking more in depth about things and kind of exchanging ideas. You kind of go to, like, this was like British cycling 12 years ago kind of thing. It's that marginal gains kind of thing, isn't it? Where actually, there's no jiffy bags of dodgy stuff get passed around the table, none of that kind of stuff within cycling, don't worry. It's more about making sure that, you go from those big gains to sort of those micro details as well. And I think it's that micro detail stuff that's actually the bit that then stimulates people to go back to the groups because they kind of think, oh, actually, I've got an idea, or I've found something, and they want to share it. And that way that those relationships build over time, I think is probably the thing that's, I guess one of the things that's probably most enjoyable for your job as a whole, isn't it, really? It isn't just about the data, it's about working with the people and helping the people develop.
Absolutely. The marginal gains element, that's the really important bit. And that those marginal gains, whether it's, a little gain here and there for particular costs, as an example, that's really the bigger wins for the farmers. You're never going to necessarily change your labour cost as a whole or your machinery costs as a whole overnight, but you can have a little think about delving into those areas and where costs can be tightened up. And as you said, David, the real exciting bit of our job is that element of working with the farmers, facilitating those groups. We're constantly learning as well, and it also gives us an opportunity to share other ideas with other groups. So we're the kind of person in the middle that then is able to say, well, actually, other people were speaking about this particular opportunity. Has anyone else done that within the group? Is that something that you could think about? Whether that be a different break crop, thinking about different breeds of animals. So we've got a real good indication to what's going on in the industry by the amount of work that we do with the groups and the amount of farmers that we see through the groups.
Yeah, and that's the benefit of having those groups, is that it's immediate feedback as well, that people turn up to them and get those groups and actually get something out of it and go away leaving with something that they can take home straight away. It's kind of like a Polaroid picture in that sense, isn't it? Straight away it's taken, you get the snapshot of it, off you go, there's a bit of detail to it, and people can go and implement it straight into their business. So what we've learned today is that financial analysis of a business is not boring. It's really interesting. You've just got to take that small step to get involved, and with a bit of support, using something like Farmbench, going to a business group, getting into the detail can be that first step. And that's the bit that will then build and build and build. And for a lot of different reasons will be really, really positive to the farm business. But thank you, Julie. Thank you for all of your work. And thank you for all of your insight to the podcast. It's been really interesting getting into that micro detail of how farm businesses work.
Thank you.
Right, Jack, did you manage to get your secret word, or words, as it's now turning into, more of a challenge in there? I did. I was quite happy with myself. Julie's got a hand up. Did you?
Oh, no.
Go on, Julie. Do you think you know what it was?
I think yours was Ikea furniture.
No, it wasn't. Oh. That was just completely throwing it.
I didn't spot. I got mine in.
What was yours then, Jack? I didn't. As ever,
So-
I've completely failed. I never get it.
So my phrase was, and I was really worried about this last night, thinking, how on earth am I going to get the phrase maternity leave into a discussion about agricultural economics?
And you successfully did. Smoothly so. Didn't even notice. Did you guess what mine was?
No, smoothly done. Couldn't spot it.
A Polaroid picture.
Oh, of course.
I know. I was going to try and get who was that? Who was the song with the Polaroid picture in? Who was that? Outcast.
Yes.
That's what I was. Hey, yeah, that's what I was going to try and do, but I was like, my singing voice just isn't there at the moment. So I was like, I'll just do it professionally.
Here's an idea: agronomics karaoke,
Oh, great one.
Christmas special.
Love it. Definitely doing that. I want to try and think how I can get agronomics into a meatloaf song.
I would do anything for agronomics.
But I won't do that.